Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. Welcome back to The Cynical Developer. Right now, it's tough for everyone. And of course, we can't say the words that refer to what's going on in the world, so we'll just call it the situation because we don't want the podcast platforms to remove us for fake news. But as you will know, if you have been following the podcast for the past several years, that I've had a few dark months myself, but I'm out the other side now and I'm back. So we're hoping to get back to bi-weekly shows, but we'll see how that goes. Anyway, as it's back to business as usual, let's get on with the show. In this returning episode, we introduce a returning guest, Matt Yonkovit, who was last on the show back in November 2019. Which, when I say it out loud, it sounds like it was forever ago, because I think we've been in lockdown for about 45 years now. But that was back in, say, November 2019 on episode 127, and that was about automation leading us astray. And Matt is back to talk to us today about the changes that are happening in the open source software sphere. Now, try and say that 10 times fast when you've had a drink. There's been a lot of changes in that time since 2019, and Matt is now head of open source strategy. He is still the chief storyteller, but he now drives the use of open source software. Before joining POCONO in 2009, Matt worked at MySQL, AB, and Sun Microsystems as a solutions architect, building out and optimizing high-performance, scalable, and always available infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies and countless other web properties. So welcome back to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me on, James. It's a pleasure to be back. I'm really looking forward to having our conversation. It's great to see you on video, but and also hear your voice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always good to get people back on. And with the way that we do record these, a lot of them are sort of video calls that are recorded. But our experience of recording in the past was face-to-face back at POCONO Live. And I really enjoyed that. And we were going to look at doing it again last year for 2020. But as it is, that didn't happen. So that's a shame. Maybe again in the future. But POCONO Live is coming back right now on May the 12th and 13th in 2021, but digitally.
Digitally, that's right. We are live online.
Very, very modern.
I think we started the trend because last year we had to pivot with like 5 weeks to go. So we were doing it in person and we were going to have this big show in Texas and it was all set up and then everything got locked down. And the whole world changed overnight. And so we had to quickly kind of pivot. And, now this will be the third virtual show. So we're really looking forward to this one.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's been really interesting for events like POCONO, like NDC, people like that have all really sort of embraced the digital platforms. Some of them, they put their content online and made it digitally available afterwards. Not a lot of them were giving feeds into the shows for those that couldn't attend. But seeing how many conferences there are now that are just telling us that we're now online, come and visit us. I think if I was to then look at which conferences to attend, I'd never get any work done or do anything else in my life.
Well, yeah, I think it's an interesting space now because with everything shut down, a lot of people were using shows as ways to promote their companies and their software and show people, hey, look at all the cool things we can do. So now everyone's just, let's put out something digital and hopefully they'll come. And, it's really interesting. And it is quite a different change. And you're right. There's dozens or hundreds of different individual conferences on very specific topics. And no matter what sort of technology you're interested in, I'm sure that you can find something that's going on within the next month that's going to talk, pretty deep about it.
Yeah. So is POCONO ticketed? Is there a fee to attend, or is it free?
It is 100% free. It's been free for the last 2 as well. This is completely open. It's being driven, 100%, via the community. Once you go to our platform, you can, we're using a hosted platform this time. In the past, we've been using YouTube. But you go in, you log in, and you can interact with, the people giving the sessions. You can watch any of the sessions that are there. And all the sessions will be available immediately following the day on YouTube for free as well. So, even if you can't make it, everything that's going to be there is going to be out in the ecosystem to help everyone. And that's part of what POCONO has always been, is we're always very passionate about trying to share our knowledge and all the wonderful things that are happening in open source with the world. This year's no different. In fact, I'm really excited. This year, we've partnered with a lot of communities. So we've got 8 different communities that we're working with across different platforms, different ecosystems, and they're building mini tracks within POCONO Live. So you mentioned everybody going digital. So, this year we've got, for instance, the Data on Kubernetes community. They built a small track of, speakers specifically talking about data in Kubernetes. We've also got, companies like MariaDB Foundation who, classically they'll speak at POCONO Live, but we said, hey, build your own mini track in addition to what you'd normally do and give us content that you think is really important for the community. And so we've got several of those this year. So it's all about sharing with the community and making sure that people, learn from one another. And that's a really important thing for us. And I'm really excited with the number of sessions. That there's over 150. I claim that there's over 200 when all is said and done, because we're still adding sessions as we go. But there's quite a few sessions, and on anything database or open source related, we've got analytics tracks, database tracks, Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB. We're talking Presto. If you know what Presto is, there's a whole community around Presto who's going to be talking at the conference. Exciting things.
Amazing. So you're getting so much bang for your buck there. It seems POCONO is going from strength to strength, and from, I want to say size to size, but that doesn't quite make sense. But it seems to be getting bigger and bigger. You're going to need a good couple of weeks, I think, eventually, just for to this event.
Well, and part of this is there's no way that everybody can see everything that they want. And so, talking like about the open source space and the database space, right now we're in this time frame where everyone is running multiple technologies now. Everyone is becoming their own mini, product orgs internally, where they're not just a LAMP stack, right? They're not just a .NET shop, or a Microsoft shop. They're an everything shop. Let's be honest, right? So you've got, dozens of databases, dozens of programming languages, dozens of different applications. All of these things have to be managed. And so we're finding the rise of kind of like the SRE or the DevOps engineer or the DBRE who has to manage like this insane complexity. So I know a lot of people who are really excited to be able to go in and say, hey, I know I got some MySQL things. I want to see this thing on MySQL. I want to see this thing on Postgres. I want to see this thing on, ClickHouse and analytics, because they have to manage all those different things. So you're right. It could be that you might be watching some cool stuff 3-4 months from now, and that's okay, because it's all going to be out there. It's all going to be free. And when you need it, it's available to you on YouTube.
Yeah. And you talked about there, not everyone is just a .NET house or just a LAMP stack house or any of those anymore. Everybody needs to be touching everything. And this is something that POCONO Live in 2019 really opened my eyes to, is that even though I host the show and I talk about all these different technologies, when I come to build software, it's tunnel vision. It's like .NET, all the things, Microsoft, everything. Right. And I always look at going, well, what technology do we use for the database? Microsoft SQL Server. Let's get that in, job done, bish, bash, bosh, done. But it comes with a massive cost. And what I actually took away from POCONO was the ability to, or the availability, should I say, of other database technologies that were so easy to pick up and run with. And the one that I did pick up was Postgres. And I've actually used that in a product that I'm building at the moment.
Oh, great.
Off the back of learning about it more from POCONO, and the fact that Postgres had this API plugin called Postgres, so you could build your API straight on top of your data. And I was like, this is awesome. I built everything in there. It had authentication and all that sort of stuff. I thought, this is fantastic, and I'm going to put this application into Azure or Azure. And that's where it fell on its face for me, unfortunately, because they went, and this is, Azure said, yeah, if you want to use Postgres, you can use the vanilla stuff and these like 4 plugins. If you want to use anything else, tough. Get yourself a VM and stick it on there.
Yes. So, and this is it's unfortunate. So let me first say, what you experienced is exactly what we want people to experience when, they visit either our blog or they come and, attend our conference. This is about inspiration. This is about innovation. This isn't about trying to sell people anything. This is about getting them excited about technologies they've never heard about. And so, the experience that you had, I hear that from a lot of different people. And it's not just at our conference. It's the open source community in general. The Postgres community is very welcoming and open. And in fact, there are quite a few great Postgres shows that are specific to Postgres out there that do some awesome content. I know like Postgres Vision, for instance, is coming up soon as well. And I think that, being able to, plug into this ecosystem of people who want to help and want to share their knowledge freely, it spurs that innovation in people. It gets them excited about things that they didn't know that they could do. And that's the whole reason why, we have the internet. Let's be honest. If you look at every large tech company on the internet, where they started with some sort of open source roots. And that's something that, you can't take for granted. And that innovation has really driven us. Now, you mentioned the cloud thing. This is one of the interesting things about the cloud. And this is where we start to look at the software side of Postgres, MySQL, other open source databases. And, there's this technology versus marketing type, debate here, right? So, you get into the cloud space and, you've got this database as a service, which is spectacular, right? You click a button, they handle the backups, they do the HA, they do all this wonderful stuff for you behind the scenes, as long as you can fit into what they define the box to be. And for some people, it works really well. But for a lot of other people, it doesn't. And it's not that they're doing anything wrong. But you look at, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or these others, and they put the databases out there. There are limitations, and sometimes there are things that don't work the same as the community version even. When you get into like the Amazon sphere, Amazon has customized Aurora quite heavily for both Postgres and MySQL. And so it doesn't always quite work with what you have out there. And the extensions in Postgres typically are the place where most people get frustrated with the Amazons, the Auroras, the Googles, right? And so that drives them to run their own databases. So and an enterprising person like yourself, maybe you want to run your own Postgres, maybe you don't, but having that opportunity, especially in the open source space, does make that valuable because hey, if you do want to, you can spin up your own compute instance. You can add Postgres on top of it. You can start it up and run it. It does take a little bit extra, but that's something that I think, in the ecosystem that we're in, there's a lot of tools and a lot of expertise with people who are there to try and help. And, that's some of the stuff that we're seeing and some of the trends is just like you ran into those Postgres problems. Or, the version, isn't quite what I want. I want the latest version. I want 2 versions ago. I want these extensions. I want it compiled a certain way. You give up that control when you go to the database as a service, but people want the database as a service experience. And that's where I see the rise of kind of Kubernetes coming in, especially in the database space, because people want that capability to run their own database as a service. They want the push button deployment, for their app, wherever their cloud is, and, boom, there it goes. And so you're seeing a lot of work there. I know certainly at POCONO, we're working on our operators for MySQL, Postgres, and MongoDB which enables you to basically go into a Kubernetes interface and you can add a database and it will set up the backup, set up the monitoring, set up everything for you in that kind of database as a service type functionality. So I get where you are and I get where you're going because I hear it all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's nothing new.
Yeah, it was quite frustrating because I spent so long sort of hammering away, going, I need to learn this. This looks fantastic. Got it working locally. I was like, right, here it goes. Let's push it up. Oh, I can't do it. How do I do this? And then I speak to Microsoft, and they went, oh well, not our problem, bud. Your issue. And it's like, oh, okay. So now I'm running it on a virtual server, an on-prem virtual server. It's sitting on there, and it's just like, right, because this is MVP at the moment. I'm just like, right, let's get the API on that and get the UI up. And I run the UI through Netlify because so I'm a bit of an idiot for new technology when I come to build a project. I don't think of an idea and go, do you know what? I'm going to build it really quickly in technology that I know and change it later. So a couple of years ago, I had an idea for an application. And I thought, well, what am I going to build that in? I played a little bit with Vue. So I built the front end in Vue. I'd never built an application from scratch in Vue. So I went and did that. That got kicked in the teeth by the industry that it was in because none of them would come and play ball. Because I sent them all the alpha and went, this is what I've got. Can I have some sort of affiliate scheme? Because it was in the holiday industry. And what I wanted to do was plug into their pricing to then kick them off to these other websites to go, yeah, now you've found your destination for your holiday, go and book it. And they were like, oh, well, you need more visitors. I was like, this is an early alpha. There is no visitors. And for my product to work, I need your stuff to get visitors. Otherwise, I'm just a glorified historical weather app. So that got kicked into touch. And then this new product I've been working on, the front end is written in Svelte. So it's a Svelte front end with a dotnet core API and a Postgres data layer on it.
So James, you mentioned that you are an idiot when it comes to new technology.
Yep.
It sounds like you are like 90% of those in the tech space. Just so you're aware, because here's the thing: the thing that we all love about this is learning new things. We love trying and experimenting and figuring new things out. And this is the thing that I've always found just fascinating and wonderful about the open source community is you are surrounded by people who are constantly thinking, yeah, I don't like the way that works. I think I can do it better. And, and you're looking for that new inspiration, that new way. And, you have the itch to scratch, and that's just normal. And it's kind of cool, actually, if you think about it. You've got people who will go out, they'll try something new. They'll look at that and go, I think I could do that better. Or, ooh, how does that work? And then they'll try it. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's that experimentation. It's that explorer mentality that makes this so much fun and such a fulfilling area to be in right now.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I got a close friend that he's very much entrepreneurial. He's got that get a product out as quick as you can, see if there's a market for it. A bit like the 4-hour body. Throw it out there.
Oh yeah.
Is there a market? Yes, let's carry on with it. If not, right, let's pivot. Let's go somewhere else. And I drive him up the wall because I've been talking to him about this product, and I'm like, oh yeah, well I'm doing it in Svelte, but I've been working on it for like 4 months and the UI is still not working. I can't get to grips with Svelte. I'm doing something wrong. And he was like, just do it in something that you already know. Go and do it in Vue. You've just built something in that. No, it's a bit boring. I want to do it in this. I'm putting some backing behind this. And then in the end, I ended up going and doing a course in Svelte to come back and rewriting the whole of the UI. It turned out I was using the paradigm in a completely wrong way.
Well, and it happens, right? But it's the motivation, right? Some of us are motivated by creativity, about learning, about, hey, I want to figure things out because I don't know about you, but I learn better when I figure it out for myself. If someone tells me like, just do X, Y, and Z, okay, I can do it, but I want to know why. I'm one of those inquisitive type of people who They want to understand the why this happens and why this works that way. And, there are other people who are not motivated by that. There are people who are motivated like, hey, I just want to get a company out there that makes a lot of money. And that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And whether they produce, good stuff, bad stuff, doesn't really matter as long as it captures enough market share. Then they'll figure out the rest later. That's not me. Some people are like that. I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. I look back on this product that I'm building and kick myself because I should have followed his advice, because in January this year, a competitor released exactly the same product. And I think I may have spoken to the wrong people, because it's got some of the features down to the finest detail, how I was going to implement it. But whereas I'm building this on my own, they've got a whole team building it. So, but it's not a race. It's not who gets there first. It's who does it better.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But that is frustrating, right?
Yeah.
It is frustrating. And this is where, it's so hard because, when you are trying to go it solo, you often find that, you'll have these great ideas, but you're just bound by the time, and this is where, if you can find other passionate, like-minded people, the open source base is a really good spot for that as well, because you can find people who can help contribute and drive, additional features when you just don't have the capacity to do 5 or 6 people's worth of jobs. Right.
Yeah. Especially when I'm working full time as a contractor. So I've got all my paying clients, and I'm working all day for some clients. I'm working all evening for other clients, depending on the time zones they're in. And you've got to try and fit all this in. It's hard.
And then you got real life, you've got family, you've got all the craziness in the world going on. It's tough. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that getting out there and finding a community around a product is something that I've not managed to get involved with in the open source sphere. And maybe it's because I'm not looking hard enough, but there was a project that I went and I picked up, and I used to really like it for unit testing, and it was called I think there's a competing product called Shudley, and it was pretty much the same as that. So it gave you like a fluent language to do your assertions with. And this only worked in .NET Framework, and I ported it to .NET Core 1.1 about 3-4 years ago. Mm-hmm. We're now up to .NET 5 or .NET Core 5, whatever you want to call it. And that PR has still not been accepted yet. It's not even been looked at.
Oh, and that's frustrating. It really is, right? So a lot of communities are communities only in name. And I don't know about this particular community, so I can't speak specifically to this. But when you look at, some companies, and I pick a lot on Mongo, but I use this because it's such a prime example here. The CEO of MongoDB came right out and said, we did not open source this to get any contributions. Which means that as a contributor, as someone who wants to make the product better, what's your motivation for contributing a PR to that? And so there are companies out there who are focused first on the business model. And there's nothing wrong with, hey, I want to be focused on the business side of things and hopefully the community happens. It's just not very open. It's not very, collaborative in nature. And I've been noticing this trend lately that more and more, as the open source market gets established as kind of a substantial player in the future of technology, and it has been for years, it's just now all of a sudden everyone's on the bandwagon. It's not just those crazy granola eating hippie dudes who are over in the corner or from Northern Europe, right? It's like everybody, and open source has now become this de facto standard for a lot of companies. And you see from an investment perspective, there's a lot of investors who kind of look at open source and say, oh my God, look how many downloads that company has, right? Ooh, they have 2 million downloads. We need to, show them how to make money off those downloads. We need to show them how to make money. And they're willing to throw dollars at this because they view it as, if I convert, 20% of those to something else, then I can get this, and then I can raise this rate, and I can change this. And they start to think about that business model. And as you do that, the open source, market changes pretty drastically, because you start to see that the motivations are no longer about that sharing, inclusive ecosystem. It's more about what's the next rung on the ladder in terms of revenue. And, we're in this really weird space now where, you see, like, and I know a lot of people are sick of talking about licensing changes, but when you talk about, like, some of these open source companies, they've switched licenses recently, and a lot of it is driven by the financial aspect. We're afraid those cloud providers are stealing all of our open source software, putting it out there for free, and, we're not making any money off of it. Well, none of these companies are poor. Let's first start there, right? I mean, you're talking about, $500 million a year companies. That's quite a big amount. They're not making any money because they're spending more than they're making, but they've got huge war chests. And so they're in it to maximize shareholder value. And to do that, they have to eliminate or reduce the competition as much as possible. And that means that the little guys and the big guys both, get squeezed out. And it's unfortunate, because now, as you start to see more new projects be developed, this latest generation of developers who are, coming out of college, they maybe been out of college for a few years, they look at the monetization schemes that involve open source software, and they're looking at those as, oh, that's normal. And so that inclusive community that many of us fell in love with early on, it's starting to get eroded, and you're starting to see some problems there.
And just a quick word from our sponsors. ConfigCat is a feature flag service. Easily use flags in your code with ConfigCat libraries for Python and 9 other platforms. Toggle your feature flags visually on the visual dashboard. Hide or expose features in your application without redeploying code. Set targeting rules to allow you to control who has access to new features. ConfigCat allows you to get features out faster, test in production, and do easy rollbacks. With ConfigCat's simple API and clear documentation, you'll have your initial proof of concept up and running in minutes. Train new team members in minutes also, and you don't pay any extra for team sizes. With a simple UI, the whole team can use it effectively. Whether you're an individual or team, you can try it out with their forever free plan. Release features faster with less risk with ConfigCat. Check them out today at configcat.com. That changing in licensing is something I've seen happen quite a lot. Where a company's gone, it's all open source, and they get to a certain point and they go, actually, we could be making some money off of this. And now we're making money off it. We don't want anybody doing anything with it. We had Clifford Aegis on talking about the bionic arms and limbs that he's making. And that happened to him with one of the projects that he was using.
Really?
The software was open source. And then the company got bought out. They changed the licensing and made the GitHub repo private. And it's one of the areas that a lot of people I talk to get spooked by open source. And it's the monetization side of it. Because a lot of them will sit there and go, well, why should I contribute to .NET? Why should I contribute to Mongo? Why should I contribute to this, that, and the other project? Because I'm spending my spare time, my free time, to develop their product and make that company money. Yes, maybe I'm building a feature that I want and I need, but what's in it for me to do that?
And that's a really good question, and it's unfortunate because how open source is supposed to work, or how it's worked, in the past, in a lot of cases, is those contributions are there for the community. And everyone benefits, right? You mentioned bionic arms. Now that's a very interesting use case, because that is something that you would think, "Ooh, that's a good thing to get limb replacements to people who need it, and to be able to use this software to help make the world a better place," right? Seems pretty noble, right? I mean, now monetization aside, And that's the cool thing about like a lot of, the open source movement. Think about like, Facebook. I like to use Facebook as an example because Zuckerberg built most of Facebook initially on the LAMP stack, right? He was out there and he put that together using all open source software. He didn't have to pay for anything. Okay. And Facebook now is one of the largest contributors to open source software in the world. They've got more lines of code than almost any other company out there. There was a couple articles just in the last few weeks on that. But you look at these companies, right? They're out there, they're contributing, they're trying to make products better. In fact, a lot of the companies that have contributed to open source have contributed so much, they've actually spawned other companies that have gone out there and built companies. I just had on my own podcast a couple weeks ago, the CTO of Yugabyte, and he was at Facebook and was on the team that built Cassandra originally. And then Cassandra got, an Apache project, which then got spun out to DataStax, right? And he had nothing to do with any of the commercialization of it. So his product actually went on and, had legs beyond him. And, as people go and they find these projects and they contribute to them, I don't think in a lot of cases they're expecting, people to give them money or pay them for their work, but they're expecting that their work matters and makes a difference, right? If you were to say someone, the work that you do, if you contribute what you just fixed, enables, hospitals around the world to stay up when power goes out, or to, provide, people in developing countries clean water, or to do these things, what? Everyone would contribute. But the problem is it doesn't go to that. It goes to, oh, look, now we've got this new feature. And because we have this new feature, we're going to raise our rates 20%. And, if you want the commercial support aspect of it, or you want to run it in, the database as a service, cloud, whatever, then, you're kind of stuck, right? You feel like left out. And this just happened with Elastic. So, Elastic was Apache licensed, right? And, they were super passionate about it. They changed their license a couple of years ago, and they said, we're going to always, maintain an open source license. And then this year they're like, nope, no more open source license. And I don't know the exact contributor count. I saw an article, and so it might be wrong, but I saw an article that there was like 2,600 contributors. Right? Think about that. 2,600 contributors to Elastic who bought into the promise that this will remain free and open and I can use it.
Yep.
That it turns you off from contributing, right? Immediately you're like, well, why would I ever do that again?
Yeah. Yeah. And because I think some of the licenses that are out there with open source, you can take that open source project and do whatever you like with it. So I guess that even with a company like Elastic changing their licensing, it was possible that they didn't even have to do that. They could have just taken that code base and gone, we're going to create this new technology, call it Elastic 2, change the licensing on it, and they concentrate on that and contribute no longer to the original Elastic project and leave that to do whatever it does. There's nothing stopping that from happening. And I think that's quite scary for the, what was it? Did you say there was 2,700?
2,627. I mean, I don't know the exact number. It was several thousand.
That's a lot of people putting code in there, and because everything revolves around money, if they'd paid for that many developers to work and do all of that, that would have cost a fair few pence, I think.
Yeah, but this is where it's super interesting from an open source perspective. Even when you contribute, a lot of times your code won't be accepted. And so sometimes there's politics at play. Sometimes the company that owns the project doesn't want to potentially have any legal kind of things. So I know we've contributed as a company to several open source projects where they've been like, thank you very much. They take the idea, they rewrite it so then they can own the IP. Right. So, I mean, okay, cool. As long as we get the feature, doesn't really matter. Yep. Right. If you can write it better than me and you can, make it more stable, whatever, integrate it better, I'm cool with that. But, the power of open source is not only the community aspect of it, but it's the ability to make it work for your specific use case. And I can tell you that the largest companies that I know of in the Silicon Valley space, right? The largest websites, the largest volume companies, they actually modify their databases quite heavily, right? And they'll even build their own database engines. When you look at Google or Facebook or Amazon has their Aurora forks. But even Uber, for instance, they're going to be speaking at our conference. They built their own distributed database to handle the workload that they have because what's out there couldn't work. And they take a lot from those different applications and those different ecosystems, and they'll integrate it. And that's part of the power of the innovation in having that freedom. And everybody can get better. And here's the thing: if any one project or company stagnates, then you can always fork, you can always change, you can always take it in a different direction. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some great benefits you talked about there. Many, many years ago, I think I've probably talked about it once or twice in the show before, but we had the Ajax Toolkit in .NET. And it gave you a few nice controls and things for web forms. And there was a bug in the calendar control. And the cadence of .NET Framework and the tools being updated then was years. It wasn't days, it wasn't weeks, it wasn't months, it was years. And this specific bug affected our application. So what we did, and it's probably back then, 100% probably against terms of service of using .NET Framework because it wasn't open source back then, is we decompiled the toolkit, the Ajax Toolkit, fixed the bug, recompiled it, and we had our own version of it that we were using until it came to a year later, 2 years later, when they fixed that bug themselves, and we went, right, we can now take that new version and use it. Whereas if it was open source, and it was in GitHub or GitLab or wherever, we could have gone, right, that's the issue. I could have fixed the bug, pushed out our version, but also put a PR in and gone, no, I'll fix this for you. Can we get that out in your next release? And that sort of stuff I think is really good because you get that turnaround. There's been I've got plenty of other examples of where you get stuck because vendors aren't turning around bugs and things quick enough. Likes of the tools that used to come out for .NET that would be destroyed by the next version of Internet Explorer that came out.
Yeah.
And it'd be like, oh, we'll fix that sometime this year.
And I think that's where, you're effectively held hostage, right? And that's a problem. And a lot of, the open source movement has been about enabling ownership, enabling you to control your own destiny, right? I mean, and this has always been kind of the famous thing back in the day before I was in the open source space when there was debate on, should we use Linux? Should we use this? It always boiled back down to, well, if that company goes out of business, we still have the source code. In fact, a lot of companies back in the day, and I don't know if they still do this in the proprietary space, when you negotiate for a specific software, you would have to put the code in, like lockdown in case the company went out of business, and then the company couldn't get access to the code, right? It would be an escrow, if you will. So we're going to use your software, but we want the code in escrow because if you go out of business, we're going to rely on your code, and we need to be able to fix it. Well,
yeah,
that used to happen quite a bit, like back in the olden days of, like proprietary software. But with open source, there is none of that. You have control. You can do it. And in the case of, like I said, some of the largest companies that I'm aware of in the world, they're using that to make the software better for them. Now, the question is, should they contribute that back? Some of them do, some of them don't. But not everything is relevant to all the use cases. I've talked to a lot of the cloud providers about their open source software. And, their use of it. And they've gotten, beat up left, right, and sideways of, oh my God, you don't contribute back. Well, they do contribute back. There is examples of that. They don't contribute back everything. But the question is everything relevant to contribute back. So if you write code that accesses an API which is not open source, is that relevant to contribute that code back to the open source space? It's kind of like, is anybody going to use that? Right? Like, or if it accesses, proprietary storage systems, or, it does something like, it just doesn't make sense. And that's where it's kind of weird, right? You think about that. It's like, okay, yeah, you want to say like, oh, shame on you for not sharing, this or that or the other thing. And maybe in some cases it's totally legitimate. They fix a bug, they don't share it back. Shame on you. If that's impacting the community. But some of it is, if you are running on system ABC, and you're accessing this proprietary thing, and you just happen to be using our proprietary XYZ, then yeah, you need this piece of code. Would you contribute that back? No. So I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So you want to see those contributions, but you don't. And like I said, there's all kinds of weird politics. There's all kinds of little tricks. And it really, in my opinion, is driven by this march to continue to monetize more and more. And how do we get shareholder value up? And we do that by closed sourcing more features, or putting them behind a paywall, or figuring out how to steal business from the cloud, or prevent other folks from impacting us. I had this epiphany this morning. I actually tweeted it this morning because I was thinking, this morning, how come open source projects that are 10 folks, 5 folks, they develop software that moves mountains, right? The original Cassandra was built in Facebook, purpose built, doesn't have all the features that it has today, by 3 people, right?
Yeah.
And so they move mountains with these small teams, right? That their passion, their innovation, they just developed all this stuff. And then you get to a company that goes public, and they're massive, and they've got 20,000 developers or 2,000 developers, whatever, and the releases are really uninspiring. They're really kind of boring. The innovation kind of stops. Instead of moving the mountain, they say, well, we like the mountain where it is. Let's try to work on the landscaping. Let's try and get them to buy the timeshare by making it more attractive, and it's this weird thing where it's like, is this push to drive to the enterprise and to chase the shareholder value really, really sucking out that innovation? Is it like, oh, we need to make this boring acceptable for the enterprises, boring acceptable? I don't know.
Yeah. Some of the clients that I've been working with over the past few years, fintech, financial industry, have been quite scared of open source. Ironically, most of them are using .NET, which is open source. Most of them are building React front ends. They're using NPM packages left, right, and center. So they're deep in the weeds with open source already. But then you mention things to them like open source cloud, and it's, oh no, open source database. Oh no, we can only use Oracle or SQL Server. We can't use anything else. Do you sort of see, is that view changing? And we all know that the financial sector is light years behind everybody else. But do you see that opinion changing elsewhere in the ecosystem? Or
of
is
course.
there still that fear?
I mean, even in the financial industry, right? So work with a lot of financial companies as well. They're typically looking for something that has more acceptable features in the open source space that matter to them, right? Whether that's security features, encryption, ensuring, data consistency, everything else, right? So from that finance perspective, where they're going is mainly Postgres. Why? Because a lot of the things that happen in Postgres are very Oracle-like. So they can, do a lot more closer to what they've been used to and accustomed to. But you can also do, a bit more on the encryption side, a bit more on the structure that exists that mimics that kind of big box enterprise experience. And overall, people are moving more away from those proprietary databases to the open source space, whether it's in the cloud or not. You're seeing that movement, though, not necessarily with the big legacy applications, because moving a big legacy application is a pain in the rear. It really is. There is no such thing as a lift and shift. There are tools, migration assistants that help with some, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to write application code. You're going to have to rewrite stuff. And a lot of companies fail because they don't think about that and they don't have the desire to rewrite. They want the cost savings of moving to open source, but then all of a sudden they don't want to pay that toll, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, I know a company that was financially incentive to move MySQL to move to MySQL from Oracle. So their managers were like, okay, managers, you need to have 10% of your entire Oracle environment moved to MySQL to save money. And so what happens? Well, I can tell you what happens. The developers go, yeah, why are we going to rewrite all this code? Yeah, we're not going to do it. Well, the infrastructure team that's responsible for managing and paying the database support bills are like, well, no, we're getting bonused on this. And the developers are like, yeah, but we're not interested in it. So there's like, all right, you go away. It just kind of drops. And so it's definitely something that, you're seeing people want more of, and the traction's there, but it's generally on the newer applications or as you're already re-architecting, those legacy applications. So as you go through that modernization effort, even in the financial space, that's when you're starting to look at what are you going to start investing on the open source side as well. So I mentioned Kubernetes a couple times. We see a lot of companies now building cloud native applications. They want to use Kubernetes to deploy their applications and manage them across multiple devices, no matter the cloud. And they're like, well, the database should run the same way. And so how do you do that? And at that point, that's when they start looking at what can I do to move this into Postgres? What can I do to use MySQL? What can I do with some of these new SQL engines, things like that.
Yeah. That migration strategy is always a killer. I had a client that when I first met them, that we're moving to the cloud. We are moving to the cloud. I was like, great, okay. I did a lot of investigative work for them because they said there were 6 applications that ran their business, and I found, I think, 97, most of which they didn't have the source code for. And I would just turn things off, and the phones would start ringing, and I was like, right, turn that back on. And there was all these things that were definitely in there. And because they didn't really know what was running their business, they went, we'll just spin up a lot of VMs and stick those in the cloud. And it's like, that's not moving to the cloud. That's taking your on-prem and making it virtually on-prem. You're getting no benefit there. So yeah, the migration always hurts. And the developers, whenever you talk to them about this sort of stuff, they go, yeah, well, we've built our application in layers, we've followed the onion architecture, or we've done end tiers, or we've done this, that, and the other. So we can take the data layer and just shift it out. We can change it to something else. Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
When you find out that someone circumnavigated it.
Yeah. Best laid plans, right?
Oh, yeah. So if the attitude in that is changing towards to open source, what do you see in the future for open source? Is it going to become this big thing? Is it going to be something that everybody's going to be involved with? Everybody's going to be using? What's your sort of take on what's coming?
Everyone already is. It's already here, right? So it's not a question of if, when. Look, I mentioned earlier, like the fact that right now you are a master of a bazillion different technologies. Point to one company that isn't involved or doing something open source related. Microsoft, who famously said, oh, Linux is a cancer, open source is evil. Now all of a sudden, we love open source. I have a sticker. It says we love open source, right? Microsoft.
Yep.
Right? So there is not a company out there who isn't using open source already. The question is how much and at what cost? And I think that's where the debate and the future really, lies. There is so much available to people right now, right? There are so many different databases. There are so many different frameworks. There are so many different ways to consume and use. You really do have a smorgasbord of choices. The issue that you run into, though, is you also have this trend where the people who would classically dictate what stack you're going to use have ceded that control to people who don't have the same oversight or the same view of the impact in the data center. So, you look at, I call it kind of the IT inheritance problem. I've mentioned this before, but you look at, companies and, you've got, project A, you're building some apps for a company or two, and you might choose Postgres, you might choose .NET, you might choose, to use Azure for, some things. And then you might have a group ancillary just sitting right next to them that is AWS, MySQL, and PHP. And so now all of a sudden you've got two completely different stacks that you need to support. And you need to have the resources to support those, because you know what? It's super easy to get started. It's super easy to get you to where you need to be to start realizing some value. If, like you said earlier, you stuck to the things that you already know, right? And so, it's an interesting debate because, when you talk about enterprises, do you say, okay, everybody, we're going to be a complete Python shop or a complete Go shop? Or do you say, oh, I've got half the developers know Ruby, a quarter know PHP, a quarter know .NET. Do what you need to do to get this application out so we can start making some money. And that's what's happening right now. And that means that you're seeing this sprawl in the data center like no time before now. And that means that, you've got lots of different programming languages, lots of different databases, lots of different infrastructure that might not all mix together.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway from that is that open source isn't changing the future. Open source is now.
Yes.
It's as you said, it's already here. You're already using it. And anyone that says, oh, we can't use it, well, unfortunately, you are. And I do know of somebody who worked for a company who famously claims that we don't use open source. We won't use open source anything. And do you know what their proprietary technology is built in? .NET. .NET.
Yeah. Well, but I can tell you, I think I could say this because MySQL AB no longer exists. So any sort of contractual thing about talking about the internals there, but I can tell you that MySQL AB used to go to companies and they would look at the download stats, and they would go to big bank, financial company, and they would be like, hey, you really should have a support contract for your databases. Data is really critical. You don't want to leak that stuff. They'd be like, we don't use open source. We don't use MySQL. That's a toy database. And they go, well, how come you downloaded it 50,000 times last year? And they'd be like, what? And then they would go find out that, there's 100 developers who built all of these applications around MySQL, and then they close a contract.
Yep.
Right. I mean, hey, it worked. Right. It worked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting space. And, we talked at the beginning about how POCONO, this open source event, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's because it covers so many areas, so many topics, that I think the limits are endless of what you can talk about, what you can do. And
you're right. And this isn't because, we support all these technologies, right? We support four databases, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, and MariaDB. That's what we support right now. But over 90% of the people that we work with use more than those four, right? So, we've got users, we've got customers, we've got people that we know in the ecosystem who are like, that's wonderful that you guys do that. I also use XYZ. I also use Cassandra. I also use Redis. I also use, ClickHouse. I also use this. And it's like, oh, yeah, well, how those work together. And, if you can get education on all of them at once, that's going to be benefit to you. So let's do it. Let's get some of that, somebody to speak on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're just about out of time. So have you got any words of wisdom for the listeners who want to get out there and get a little bit more into the weeds with open source?
Well, I think that, realize that there's many different companies that, have open source, software out there. There's multiple different ways that they go about communities. And if you feel that you're not being included or it's not inclusive enough in one community, I would encourage you to not just give up and continue to look for, the right community for you and to get involved, right? And don't feel that getting involved is just about coding. Don't feel that getting involved is just about, like what you can, give in terms of software. Because a lot of times just hearing how you use things or what would be cool or brainstorming innovation would actually be a very valuable contribution to the community. I've talked to over 20 open source executives over the past couple months, CTOs, VPs, directors, all these different people who are, passionate about open source. And I asked them, hey, how do people get involved here? And they're like, oh, we'd love it if somebody came to us and said, oh, you should really do this, or I don't like that feature, or, just that feedback. So anytime that you're using, don't get scared, contribute, your knowledge, your passion, contribute what you find aggravating, what you find exciting. We want to know, and that's going to help us all make a better product. And, you're going to hear, some wonderful, awesome things.
Fantastic. And for those of you who are listening to the show in real time, not live, but when this comes out, do head over to POCONO Live on the 12th and 13th of May and check that out. I will include some links in the show notes to that. Go and give everybody some support. Don't burn yourselves out by trying to get to every talk. I don't think you could listen to everything simultaneously. But do give them the support that they need. But thank you for coming on and talking to us again, Matt.
Yeah, anytime, James. Anytime.
Yeah, maybe next time it'll be in person again. That'd be good.
Yeah, indeed.
And thank you to everybody out there listening. Thank you for supporting us through the dark times and through the down times we've had over the last several months. It's good to be back, and let's look forward to the future with some more good content. So thank you. And I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Matt Yonkovit talking about the changes in open source software. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help the Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.